Hello, welcome to today's webinar on cost estimating on Change Happens. This webinar is the third of a series hosted by the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management. I'm Patricia Bush, Program Manager for Bridges and Design at AASHTO and today's host. Before we get started, a few housekeeping tips to help you enjoy today's session. All attendees are automatically muted for the entire webinar. If you have questions at any point during the presentations, you can submit them by using the Q&A button on your Zoom webinar control panel. We will answer them as time allows at the end of the webinar. This session is being recorded and the link made available on the Technical Committee on Project Management webpage. You can easily navigate to it by going to design.transportation.org and selecting Project Management from the menu on the left. PDFs of today's presentations will be made available on the TCPM webpage as well. An email with a PDH certificate will be sent to all attendees later today. If you can't find it, be sure to check your spam or junk folders. Download the certificate and keep it for your records. Now I will turn things over to Lynn Isaac, Vice President at Whitman, Reckert and Associates in Austin, Texas. Lynn has 30 years of project and program management experience in the design and construction of roadways, multi-level interchanges, and bridges. Additionally, her background includes critical path method scheduling, utility coordination, and construction management gained from her work at the Florida and Texas Departments of Transportation, founding her own engineering firm and working in the private sector. Throughout much of her career, Lynn has managed high-profile, publicly charged design and construction projects spanning both design bid build and design bid environments. Most recently, she led the stand-up of the statewide project and portfolio management team and development of the project management tools and training for TxDOT. Lynn served as the vice chair for the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management and now serves as a friend of the committee, supporting the committee's mission of elevation of the discipline of project management on the national level. Lynn?
All right, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate you joining us. I will go ahead and introduce our two panelists today. I'll be serving as moderator. We have Rob Tieman. He is the director of the Project Management Office at the Virginia DOT. And diving into Rob's background, he, as I said, he serves in the role as director at the Virginia DOT of the Transportation Project Management Office, which serves as the technical project management and engineering support unit for preliminary engineering. Rob has also over 25 years of progressive project management and engineering expertise, concentrating and leading transportation projects, programs, and portfolios. Prior to joining Virginia DOT, he held positions in consulting and local government arenas. Rob serves in a number of industry roles. Most notably, he is the chair of the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management and a member of the AASHTO's Committee on Design, where he also serves as a member of the Executive Committee on Design. He also sits on the University of Virginia's Civil Engineering Professional Advisory Board. He has a civil engineering degree from the University of Illinois and is a licensed professional engineer and project management professional. So welcome, Rob. And also today we have Sarah Fetters, and Sarah is with the Michigan DOT, where she serves as a Southwest Region project manager. She is also a graduate of Michigan State University and has been with the Michigan Department of Transportation for 20 years. She's held various positions while throughout the state of Michigan, including engineer of development programs, where she rotated from utility and permits to design and construction at the Jackson Transportation Service Center. Also design engineer, cost and scheduling engineer at the Marshall TSC, and then specs and estimates engineer in Lansing, project manager for the Southwest Region Office. Sarah has worked on a variety of projects ranging from overlay projects to interchange projects and freeway reconstruction and everything in between. So welcome to both Rob and Sarah. And with that, we will be hearing from them in a moment. We did have a quick survey to ask you guys. So Trisha, if you could bring that up, we're just trying to get an idea of where everybody is from. So hopefully you saw the poll jump up there on your screen. And if you could just identify where you are joining in from, we are interested to know, how big of a swath are we getting today? How many people are joining us? And this helps also to get you guys ready for, we have two other questions as we go through our webinar today that will help to, make everyone a little bit more engaged and hopefully enjoy the session as we go through. So I don't know if I stretched it out long enough, but Trisha, are we seeing on the back end people responding? All right, well, here we go. So we have representation from all areas around the country. So thank you again for joining. At the Southeast, it seems to be that's where we have 46% of the folks joining in. So if you have identified yourself as joining in from the Southeast, that's where we seem to have the majority, but not to be left out. The Northeast is coming on strong there, and the Midwest. So we welcome everybody. We are glad that you're here with us today, and we hope that you have value stemming from these webinars. We've really put a lot of work into the content to make sure that they are valuable to you and that you take away something, a nugget of goodness as you go back to developing transportation projects and delivering those. So we will now turn it over to Rob, who's going to kick off the session and talk about change management. So Rob, I will let you take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I really appreciate being here today. And before I pull up my presentation, I just wanted to mention that I think many of us have had the joy of doing project postmortems when something goes sideways. And they're not always fun when leadership comes to you and say, what happened? How did it get so far off the rails so quickly? And while there's many reasons for that, one commonality is almost always poor change management practices. So hopefully the webinar today will help with that. And I'm going to share my screen here. So if you bear with me for just a couple seconds. I think we're up and running. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're going to start with, to be able to go forward. So just a minute. Forgive me, I'm going to try this again. How are we doing? Can everybody see that?
There you go.
Excellent. Thank you. Sorry about that. So we're going to start with what I think are two inevitable truths. You may not like them, but it doesn't mean they're any less true. And I love these quotes: that change is inevitable, but progress is optional. And the second one there, change is hard, resisting change a lot harder. I'm convinced Eleanor must have been thinking about government when she said that. As we move forward, let's start with the triple constraint. Everybody knows this. It's part of our life. We live with it every day. The budget, scope, schedule are uniquely intertwined. We can't change one without changing the others. We all know that. And there's certainly underlying connections of risk, resources, and qualities, and much more, I would argue. But what's important here is that the triple constraint defines the project parameters. That's where project managers live. That's where they operate. They control the project from within those three primary constraints. And what's important, really important to this discussion, is that as a basis for change management. You can't really talk reasonably about change management without first knowing your budget, scope, and schedule. I also think it's important to note that many of us are working in or towards a project-centric mindset. And that means in your organization, every project has one schedule, every project has one budget, Projects are expected to be delivered within schedule and budget, and the money is programmed based upon that budget and schedule. And I think that's tremendously important because in this environment, accurate budget scopes and schedules really do matter. Because the big picture of transportation is that the right color of the right kind of money in the right place at the right time to keep a project moving forward. And you can't do that unless you have accurate budget scopes and schedules. And once again, we need to be able to change that as it evolves through the project. And if you don't, that's generally where you run into problems. So what are some common threats to budget scopes? These are ones that just came to my mind. I'm sure many of you would have your own list. Utility issues, railroads, funding availability, market conditions, entropy, one of my favorites, where if you leave a system or a project to its own devices, naturally it will devolve into increasing states of disorder. I think that's especially applicable for transportation projects. There's political indecision, bureaucratic inertia, staff turnover, and many, many more. If you haven't experienced these, you probably will. If you keep practicing in this field long enough. And what's interesting about this list to me is that many of these causes for project changes are outside of our control. We do not directly control them. There's an old quote by Charles Swindoll that life is 10% what happens to you and 90% of how you react to it. I think that's certainly true here. So we look at projects also. I think it's natural that some changes will occur or evolve over time. Sometimes it's unrealistic to assume a budget scope schedule that set its scoping will remain static to the life of the project. And there may be good reasons for that. And these are just some that I put together. If you look at across the top, the estimate milestones, they're going from left to right from preliminary, and that's general plan design, milestones of 30% design, public hearing, 60%, 90%, and then the PS&Es or engineer's estimate. As we progress, we would assume the risk and assumptions decrease. We would assume that the refinement of qualities increases. But there are other factors, such as stakeholder involvement, which are relatively low in the beginning, typically, usually spike around public hearing, but then may not go away very quickly, but may continue to influence the project. And through all that, we expect the budget, scope, and schedule accuracy to increase as we continue in design. There are also some human elements at play that really influence change management realities and practices. And I think oftentimes we disregard these or don't spend much time thinking about them or really recognizing their significance. And just some of these I've listed here. One is anchoring. I'll use politicians as an example here, that they rely too much on the first information we see. That first project estimate they receive at preliminary engineering, oftentimes that's the one that's glommed onto by media or by politicians or perhaps others within your organization. And they keep coming back to, I thought it was going to cost this much, even though we may have a far greater and more accurate estimate years later. They still go back to that first number they heard. Another is being data delirious, overemphasizing the importance and accuracy of available information regardless of the context. And I think that's really more common than we would like to admit. Another is deference. And a lot of project managers do this willingly or unknowingly, where they just blindly proceed as if management's expectations are realistic and achievable. And that kind of goes back to the ability to say no, or at least question what this change really means. And we'll get into that in a little bit, which leads directly into denial, which we all know rarely ends well. Next is optimism bias. Many engineers are guilty of this, myself maybe among them, of believing we are more likely to realize positive opportunities and less likely to experience negative opportunities. So things are going to work out. They always generally do. Perhaps you have a track record of success and you kind of extend that to other people and assume that they may have similar track records of success. But an optimism bias is very real. And the last I wanted to list is pride, thinking we know better. And a different way to say that might be engineer's bias, I'll say, which I think many of us are guilty of, where if a problem comes up or a conflict comes up, it's a challenge. And many engineers love challenges. And we think to ourselves in the recesses of our mind, I can take care of that. I can solve that. We can do that. That may be true, but not necessarily the best way to manage change. So when you're managing change, I think it's important to think about changes compared to what. And that's really a key question that needs to be answered. And it goes back to your project baselines, both for budget and scope and also schedule. Every organization typically captures that at different times. Sometimes they're all the same milestones, sometimes they're different milestones, sometimes they're revisited, but these baselines form the triple constraint of budget, scope, schedule through which your project needs to be managed. So it's important you know, when are these baselines set, how are they set, and how are they able to be managed and changed? Until you know that, it's very difficult to institute meaningful change. So let's talk about some keys for change. How do we actually do this? The first one of 7 that I've listed here is to know your project development schedule. Every project manager should be able to answer these 5 questions at any time on their project. What needs to be done? Who on the team needs to do it? When it needs to be done? Why it's important? And how it impacts the project development process. I would assert if they can't answer that question, they really aren't doing the job very well and they need more training or more knowledge. Once again, you really need to be able to do this if you're a project manager at any point when anything comes up on your project. You can't reasonably say no or even begin to evaluate the intended and unintended consequences of a change if you don't really understand your project development process. So that's key number 1. Number 2 is to practice risk management. As project managers, we should be viewing much of our work life through risk management glasses. And when risks come in and we catalog them on risk registers and all the other things we do, I think it can be beneficial to think where within the knowledge quadrant those risks fall and which bucket. And you can see this is on your left there. I'm going to start in the upper right with the unknowns. These are the surprises, the things on the left field that you just can't forecast. We think about them, we talk about them, but they really happen pretty rarely. Going down, these are the known knowns. These are things we know and can hang our hats on. The firm quantities, once we get to that point in estimates, the design standards, things we know. Next are the known unknowns. And these are things where we know there are things that are coming, but we don't necessarily understand the full picture of what that looks like. So in a project, it may be that we know we're going to need to relocate the water line. We don't really know how much that's going to cost yet, but we know it's going to have to happen. And that's usually accounted for in estimates by allowances. And then, of course, the last would be contingencies, the unknown knowns. And how that looks in estimates. In Virginia, we think of estimates having 4 components that come together to form the complete estimate. And that's defined cost or the quantities, things you know, their allowances, contingencies, and then inflation. And as you can see on the schematic, beginning a project initiation and moving towards the right, as the project progresses, risks should change. They should be more defined, they should be mitigated, and the percentage of those different components changes as the estimate matures and goes towards advertisement and award. And this is important with change management because you can only really do this effectively if you continue to change that triple constraint. The third, back to the triple constraint common theme, is how you actually manage that. And this goes back to PM 101. Every project manager should be doing this often, at the very least at every major milestone, where you confirm the scope, monitor the schedule, update the estimate, verify the budget, and then rinse and repeat again and again and again. And this is tremendously important. It's more than just an activity. It's part of your job. It's what you should be doing. You need to confirm the scope. Is what you're designing still solving the problem at hand? Have the site conditions changed? And maybe you need a different solution, but you need to confirm the scope. Then are we still on schedule? What's it going to cost? And do you have enough money to actually build it? Again, rinse and repeat. And this is tremendously important as it applies to change management, because you really can't grasp that sometimes even there's a change afoot unless you continue to do this process. The fourth is to understand the change. And this is something that takes time. And some PMs do this extraordinarily well. Others honestly struggle with it. What is the change that's at hand? And I'll give a small example of if you have an urban corridor and your leadership comes to you, be it political or technical, and says, we really want to extend this sidewalk an extra 1,000 or 2,000 feet to connect this neighborhood to maintain mobility continuity. A fine and noble idea. And maybe that's a great idea, but it comes at a cost. So when they ask you, or maybe direct you to do this, can we do that in a project? Of course, we're engineers. We can do anything with time and money, right? But it comes at a price, both the price of money and a price of time, and perhaps other factors as well. So in that instance, I think it's important that you not only determine what are the impacts to budget, scope, and schedule. If I change that scope, it's going to cost more money. It may change the schedule. How do you really do that? I think it's really important to get the right voices in the room, to reach out and get the right subject matter experts. So in this simple example, your limits of disturbance obviously have changed. You're going to have to bring in the right-of-way people. You're probably going to have to bring in environmental people. You may have to bring in hydraulics. You may need to bring in traffic. Maybe all the disciplines in some nature need to be consulted when changes occur. That's really important to do as a project manager in order to wrap your arms around what are the true intended and unintended consequences. And that leads us to our fifth point, which is to know and use your organization's change management processes. Most every transportation organization has a change management process. Somewhere it's in a manual. Whether it's known, whether it's followed, that may be a different story. But I find it interesting that most change management policies, to my knowledge, follow this general progression. If you request the change, you do an impact analysis. What does it really mean, the change to the project? What are its implications? There's a decision. You either approve the change or you don't. You implement the change and then you review it. What I find terribly interesting in the transportation industry is we did this really well on the delivery side of the house. Construction change orders, change management during construction is something most organizations are really quite good at. Conversely, most organizations are not very good at doing this during development. It doesn't mean it's any less important. It's just not practiced as much, but it should be. And if you follow this, you'll be in a much better position to handle the change, decide whether it's acceptable or not, and then deal with the consequences. The sixth is to find and implement technical solutions. We're engineers. This is the one we typically do pretty well. When somebody throws us a curveball, we're able to adjust our swing and hit it usually. And we do that by being innovative. Performance-based design, of course, is gaining popularity and as it should, and allows us to really focus on the what, but be flexible on the how. And I would urge us all to remain agile and nimble in our thinking and our solutions. I think it's incredibly important to include the right SMEs, subject matter experts, and decisions. Make sure you're capturing everything. And as a project manager, you have the unique opportunity to be strategic, courageous, and decisive. And sometimes that means saying no, and sometimes that means saying yes, but you have that ability and that freedom to do so, and you should exercise it. And again, this is something we typically do pretty well as engineers. The last point I have are soft skills. And I think it's incredibly important to realize that when a change happens in a project, there's so much more than just the technical solution, the technical component of that. How that change is implemented can dramatically impact the morale and the culture of your team. It can also dramatically impact stakeholder expectations, how that change is implemented and how it's communicated. And as such, think about how you're communicating with the team, because you may be working with members who supported the change. There may be team members that were very much against that change. You need to bring everybody back together and get everybody working in the same direction once again. Not necessarily easy to do, but tremendously important to do. So think about effective ways to communicate with people, be that in a group or individually. The same goes with stakeholders. Changes can make a dramatic impact in a stakeholder's expectations and perceptions of a project, both positively and negatively. It's tremendously important that you communicate back to them what those changes are, what the decisions were, and how it will impact them. I would strongly encourage you to leverage RACI metrics if you have one in your stakeholder engagement plan, to think about who you need to communicate with and what they need to hear in order to bring them back on board and at least have them understand what's going on. Whether they agree with it or not, they at least can feel heard and be on board with what's happening. And that leads into some of these soft skills that you as a project manager probably already have or can continue to develop, as we all do through our life: conflict management, influence management, negotiations, managing expectations. And I think it's important as a project manager to realize change is a unique opportunity you have with your team and your stakeholder and your leaderships to lead and to motivate people and to really build trust and strengthen relationships. And I'd urge you to take advantage of that opportunity when it presents itself. So with that, I will turn it back over to Lynn, and I can get out of here.
All right. Thank you,
very
Rob.
much.
I really appreciate that. And while I've got you, you talked about soft skills, and I think it is important for a project manager to understand our stakeholders. And one of the items that we were going to ask the audience here was about emotion. So Tricia, if you could pull up our next poll, we're just wanting to know, what feelings do you are coming up for everyone here when we talk about the topic of change management. So it could be excitement, anxiety, fear, frustration, denial, all of the above. All of the above is not an option, but it really does behoove us as project managers to understand that there are feelings that are that come up for everyone, not only our team, but our stakeholders, and to have that emotional intelligence to pick up on what people might be feeling. So, Robin, did you have anything to add to that, or?
I don't think so, Lynn, other than to
Okay.
just emphasize exactly what you said. And the emotions may be very different with different audiences that a project manager needs to interact with in order to execute the change.
All right, very good. Trisha, do we have some responses to look at? All right. So excitement is high up there, a lot of anxiety. So I don't know, can everyone see the results? Okay, cool. All right. So anxiety, 59%, little bit of trepidation there with fear, some frustration, definitely. If you have been working on a set of plans and marching one way and a change comes up and you have to change direction, that could cause some frustration. And then, what there is that denial piece that comes up sometimes. And, when you were talking, Rob, earlier about the different bias that come up, than what we have innately within us, that optimism bias item really resonated with me. Just always taking that positive spin on things. So I don't know if it's a denial thing, but it very well could be. So thanks everybody for participating. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Rob. And we will come back to you, Rob, with questions here after Sarah is done with her presentation. So Sarah, just teeing you up a little bit. I don't know if you know, but I am a Michigander, a native Michigander. So I appreciate you being here, although I do see a Spartan on your shirt. I don't know what that means. No, I'm just kidding. But I appreciate you being here. We really do. We appreciate you sharing with us on a particular project you're pulling up on I-94. I know that this project has been near and dear to you for a long time. So I am going to turn it over to you without further ado and let you walk us through some of the changes that happened on this project. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Lynn. My name is Sarah Fetters. I've been working on this project. Feels like a long time, but it's been about 2.5 years. My manager went to the Astro conference and came back and said, boy, do I have a job for you. They were talking about changes in projects, and I didn't give them your name or volunteer you, but I think your project would fit into that slot very well. So here I am. And for those that aren't aware, I-94 is an interstate that connects Detroit to Chicago. This project in particular is in the southwest half of that, and it's about an hour and a half from Chicago, following the bottom of Lake Michigan. So the original project was 4.1 miles of rehabilitation with the reconstruction of the interchange, a large culvert replacement, an auxiliary lane, and about $33.5 million. But about the time we were getting rolling on this project, the governor ran her campaign on a Fix the Roads and ended up securing funding through bonds in 2020 with about a $3.5 billion statewide dollars. So they came to me and said, hey, we've got this project that ties in with yours. We're submitting it for bonds, and we got the funds. So in addition to the original 4.1 miles, we added an additional 6.4 miles of reconstruction, an interchange reconstruction, new ramp, 7 bridges, and for an additional $56 million. So here's the original, and here's the new. So as you can tell, that's become quite a large project. So the project is now just shy of $90 million. But in our state, when a project crosses the $50 million threshold, a value engineering study needs to happen. So during this study, there's a team of outsiders not related to the project that started with a list of 166 items that they reviewed for the project, which they eventually narrowed down to 6 that were evaluated in the final proposal. Of those 6, we agreed upon 1, as the other 5 were things that we had looked at in previously in the project during the scoping phase. So that one that we added was the additional bridge rehabilitation over the CSX railroad. But this new scope of work also added a reconstruction section, and in the state of Michigan, when you get over a $1.5 million of pavement, it triggers a life cycle cost analysis. And so what this means is there's some calculations, and it calculates the maintenance of the road over the next 30 years, along with a few other things. And in our case, it came back that we should do an alternate bid design, which is designed with both concrete and HMA. I found out recently that this is a constraint in Michigan for legislation for reconstruction projects. So in my case, the plans will show both a concrete and an HMA option to be bid on, and the contractors will bid on one of them, and that's how the determined fix will be. So going into the letting, we don't know what it's going to come out as, which is a question we get asked by a lot of the public. So in this case, both the value engineering and the life cycle cost analysis modified the schedule, the budget, and the scope. So one more change happened to this project with the new project that was added. The interchange at M60, one of the interchanges, M63, we added this new ramp. And this was added to assist with the operations, because currently the projects, the vehicles had to take a left. And what happened is these people were all turning out. So they had, and crossing the bridge. So it was backing up, blocking this driveway, blocking the intersection just south of here. So they reached out to us and said, hey, we'd like to add a ramp. What do we need to do? We thought, great, we'll do that. During our study phases, it was determined that when you add a ramp to an interchange, it triggers a noise analysis. This is something new that I had never had to deal with in the past, as most of my interchanges we matched existing layouts. So we had to do a noise analysis. What that meant was we had to evaluate, we created this noise analysis report. We evaluated the road with a bunch of noise sensors. That's what all the polka dots look like. Then it was determined what sections were impacted and what sections were not, or which ones were recommended and which ones were not. During this whole phase study of the noise analysis, we had to reach out to the property owners and have multiple public meetings. This all delayed the overall projects, and we ended up having to pull out a section of our project, and we let it as calling it a pre-MOT, or the maintaining, can we maintain traffic the following year to keep construction in line. So by doing that, we had a standalone project for the maintaining traffic. We had many public meetings. We discussed, do we incorporate the walls in our existing project? Do we have a standalone wall project? What should we do to move forward? Because most of the walls are at the shoulder, we decided it made more sense and save taxpayers money, along with not having to come back 3 years later and build a wall project and impact traffic, that we'd incorporate it in this project. So after the residents who were impacted got to vote on the walls, and 5 walls were being voted on and 4 made it through the votes. So then after we had all our votes determine the wall, then we had to figure out what our walls were going to look like. Since the existing bridges or proposed bridges in the area was already voted for a fieldstone, we decided to match the fieldstone on the bridges to our walls to make it one unique corridor. As you can tell by just listening, it affected our schedule, it affected our budget, and definitely affected our scope of work. So the next thing that hit us was we had to meet with our property owners. We needed some additional right-of-way for a majority of our couple locations of work. And one of them was for a box culvert that we're installing. So you can see right here is our existing box culvert. We're putting in our proposed box culvert. This ramp is being shortened, being pulled tighter, so a tight diamond. So the box culvert didn't need to be as long, but we didn't want to build it in the same location. So here you can kind of see is the existing drainage easement, and we fit within it, but it's kind of hard to do construction and grade the behind the slope without getting a little extra. So we reached out to the property owner after getting all the information from the County Drain Commission, and the property owner came back with us and said, no. And we're like, what do you mean? No, what are your concerns? And when they bought the property, they didn't believe that the existing drainage easement was official, and they're fighting the drainage easement with the drain commissioner. Now, obviously, we didn't know this when we went with our design. So now we're either going to have to go back and redesign the culvert, leave the existing culvert in place, which is in fair condition. But with the amount of work we're doing in this area, the likelihood of us coming back in the near future, we thought this is a prime opportunity to take advantage of the road being closed. So now we have to go back and reevaluate what we're doing here. So one more stop in the playbook. So this doesn't really affect the budget, but it does affect our schedule and our scope. So the additional walls prompted a STIP amendment for the increased cost of the project, which for those that don't know, that requires us to work with the locals to create public notices on the changes and then vote of the board and to approve the change in budget. So we had to, and then we talked about the delay because we're still working through the property rights on the culvert. We're trying to figure out how we're going to move forward with that. And then money's tight now all of a sudden. We had a project in our region come back, $39 million over budget. Where are we going to get that money from? We don't have our own Dana DeVito to throw money at us. So our project alone increased quite a bit. We went from 33.5 million to 57.1, 56 million to 108 million for the bond project, for a new total of $165 million. Remember, we started at just shy of 90. So what are we going to do? The main increases, not only, the extra walls that went up, but cost of the labor and supply is going up. Supply issues were happening. Getting the bridge beams in place in time, the extra work throughout the state with all the bond money. Like I said, we got $3.5 billion statewide added to the program. And just as we were going to turn the project in, we delayed it to move to a June letting, just so we can figure out a couple of these things, the money and the culvert, and how can we create a better project for the contractor to bid on. So the schedule, the budget, and the scope all hit snags. So this is going to be a June 2023 letting. We're still moving forward. We're still making changes. We're still making a better project. The work will begin in August 2023. We're going to do a little bit more prep work. We're going to do some work on the shoulders and the lanes to allow for the additional traffic. And then 2024, we're looking at doing the south half of the project. In 2025 and 2026, one will be westbound, one will be eastbound, and some cleanup work in 2027. So there's always cleanup work. So even though this project changed, the project balance triangle Rob mentioned with the schedule, budget, and scope, we understood the change. We made decisions at each step to see that was right for the project and analyzed how we needed to move forward. So let's bring it back together. So we have the triple constraint that Rob was talking about, something that all project managers try to maintain through the life of the projects. But what happens when the project balance is being hit by all three sides? You have to manage it. You take a deep breath, you analyze the changes. How does it affect the scope, budget, and schedule? And as you can tell, this project has had lots of changes, a few delays, but if there was more resistance from me and my team as the project manager, these steps would have taken even longer. So the ball would have stopped rolling. And we heard this a lot through my years from my old manager, Brad. Design is an iterative process. You have to be ready for change because it is always there. So I appreciate you guys listening to what's been going on, and we're opening up for questions.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate that you're sharing with us. I know that a lot of us have gone through projects and had similar situations. They don't all seem to come together on the very same project, so you're lucky that way. But you seem to be handling it very well, and you still have a smile on your face, so that's good. You can definitely thank your boss for presenting this like thinking of you. but really you have, I think of a swan gliding across the water, and it looks so calm above, but the little feet are going underneath the water. So we appreciate what you do and everything that you've had to manage here for the last 2.5 years. And in 2026, I'm going to come over there and just
It'd be so nice.
drive on it. Yeah, I want to drive on that project. So we do have a question, and I'll ask Rob to come back on too, if you could. This is the part of the program. Oh, I guess we have one question before we open it up to those here attending. We did have one more poll that we wanted to ask you guys while we've got a moment. So here is the last question. What are the most common factors that prompt budget scope and schedule changes on your projects? And are they market condition volatility, changing local priorities, right-of-way challenges, utility conflicts, or funding uncertainties, or staffing challenges? Or did we not cover it, which we don't have? You guys can obviously put that in the chat if you want to, but it's interesting to know that, there are several things that can come up on projects, and it's not necessarily just one of those factors, but we all are managing many things that change on projects. So did I give enough time for everyone to respond? All right. Thank you so much for your participation. This is awesome. All right. So right-of-way challenges. So back to the culvert, right-of-way challenges are definitely a thing on projects. Utility conflicts a lot of times go hand in hand. Utilities sometimes are found unexpectedly. So they're sometimes those surprise things that come up and we least expect them. But I think the market volatility and the funding uncertainties are probably happening more so now these days, in the conditions that we're in with the economy. Definitely the human factor is a problem, not only for owners, but for consultants, and then also on the contracting side too. So we're all feeling that human resource crunch. So thank you guys for participating. I'm very excited to know that everybody was able to join in on those polls. So we will now segue. I have a question that's come in, and Sarah, I think this is for you. The question is, what is the project management methodology used in the project? Were you using an agile or waterfall methodology, or was it mixed? I think you probably can jump right in there. Yeah,
it was a mix of bouncing ideas off of my peers and talking to construction. How are we going to make this work? With the real estate, we huddled down. What are we going to do? We're meeting with hydraulics next week to kind of figure out what we need to do about this culvert. It's just kind of a mixed bag of how we do things based on what I've learned from my peers in the past. So it's kind of a mixed bag of project management skills based on who I've worked with over the last few years, and or last 20 actually. But so that's kind of how we work. We try to do a team effort to that way you can bounce it off somebody else. So one person isn't making the decision, because hindsight's always 20/20 when you do it by yourself. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Rob, have you at Virginia DOT, are you guys using the agile methodology at all on transportation projects? Or
yes, but not as formally as we hope to. I think most transportation projects are inherently waterfall, and will probably remain so, at least in structure, based upon the necessary gates through which we need to pass for funding and other things. But we are certainly aiming to and do include more nimbleness through agile, revisiting scope and things like that. And a lot of that's being prompted by the application-based project selection, where we do more work up front, and then oftentimes the budget is set very early on in the project in Virginia, where it used to be the scope was set. So if we're going to build a 4-lane bridge over the river, we're going to do that. And it was going to be built according to standards and look just like every other 4-lane bridge over the river. And if it took a little bit longer, it costs a little more, we deal with that. That's changing, and just not in Virginia, I know. So I think it necessitates more agile approaches. Being able to mesh the two is a real challenge for our industry. And a lot of DOTs are trying to work through that, and VDOT certainly among them. But yeah, I think it's inevitable that we will incorporate more agile policies and mindsets, at least, into the waterfall model.
All right, thank you. We have a couple of more questions. So how are you planning to treat your statewide programs as discretionary grants, add certain levels of uncertainty to the equation? I don't know who that's directed to necessarily, but Rob, if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure, I think that's a great question, and levels of uncertainty is probably a great way to characterize it. And that's the case with a lot of different funding sources that flow through, where the project may be selected, and the way in which you secure that money is very big picture and very broad. And once you start painting in the details, some of those initial promises may be hard to keep. In that case, I think it's really important that you practice change management and follow your organization's procedures, because once again, you need to remain true to the triple constraint of budget, scope, schedule, and that's just really difficult to do. As Sarah said, sometimes you can't, but then in order to make adjustments to whatever you need to adjust, you really kind of have to get your arms around what does this mean. And I love the example Sarah gave, because from the outside looking in, I wrote down the numbers again. It amazes me every time, but it went from 90 million to 165 million, which from the outside looking in, if you just heard that, you'd think, oh, what happened? I mean, this is a terrible project, but as you hear it and you see what is being developed, it's clearly a success story, and being able to bring everybody together and move forward and deal with the changes that are needed. But the only way it sounds like they were able to do that is by proactively working with everybody.
Absolutely. And you did touch on, Rob, that bias, that, that initial bias where, somebody would hear that initial number and then hear this other number and be like, what just happened? So that's a real thing. So, all right. The next question is, what process do you have in place to control the change at your agency? So this is for either one of you. So Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we have a monthly meeting that we for our team, and we go over, changes to the project. Before we make any major budget changes, we have to say, what's kind of like the triple constraint, why is it changing? What is it changing? What is the purpose? Just to make sure that we actively manage not only our budget, but our schedule. So we have these monthly meetings where we bounce our projects off each other. We say what's going on with them. And then is that the right idea to move forward? If so, then we go through and process our change request, which is adding the money or adding the work type to the project. If it's not, then we problem shoot and see how we need to move forward. These monthly meetings kind of get everybody on the same page of what's been going on.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on, there was a clarification question, and Rob, you might be able to address this on what do we mean by waterfall methodology? And is that a linear process that's not receptive to changes?
That's a good summary of it. Yeah, waterfall means it's a linear process. You can almost think of it like water flowing down a prescribed path from drop to drop to drop. And we use it very commonly in transportation. The critical path method just kind of flows within that framework of you have a number of tasks, you lay out a work breakdown structure, and then they're put, nose to tail or tail to nose all the way until you complete. So yes.
All right, thank you. Thank you. All right, the next question is, with scopes and costs increasing, what are the DOT's thoughts on going back and possibly de-scoping certain aspects of a project and bringing it back in alignment with the budget?
I think it's a growing trend. That's certainly something we're doing in Virginia, where And we have the tools to do it now with performance-based design and other things. We have a lot more freedom. I think we view design waivers and design exceptions as opportunities now and not something to be avoided at all costs. I think there's a lot of opportunities to especially with market conditions now, to look and what do we really need to build, but I think that needs to be balanced by the engineers and the designers with, are we still solving the problem? What's the purpose and need? And with some funding sources, there may be a benefit cost analysis, which you need to go back and redo, which kind of is a great gut check to know if you're still accomplishing your primary goals. But certainly there are opportunities to cut scope, but I would just caution everybody, do that only to the point that you're still satisfying the purpose and need of the project.
Very good. All right. Sarah, did you guys have any conversations on your project about scaling back and trying to stay within the budget?
Yes, we did. The second half of the project, the original half of the project was originally, it's a rehabilitation. We're just doing an overlay over the existing pavement. And throughout the life of the design, they kept saying, why don't we just reconstruct the whole thing? Why don't we just, so, you know, we did have to say no to things. As you can see, we said yes to some things, but you know, a couple times we had to say no. In previous projects, we had a culvert that would had to be triple the size of pretty much what it is now. Is slightly undersized. We couldn't add it the time schedule, couldn't add it to our schedule, we couldn't add it to our budget. So we ended up cutting out that interchange and adding it as a separate one so that we could evaluate the culvert at the proper, to figure out the proper size that we would need to carry that stream. So we have done things in past projects. In this one, we just kept moving forward, it seemed like, and turned down some things, added other things, and tried to meet in the middle a little bit to keep it moving. Doesn't sound like it with the cost change when Rob says it like that. When I said it earlier too, you know, 90 to 165, it doesn't sound like I said no to a lot of things, but the cost of doing business is a lot more expensive than when we originally scoped it to 5 years ago. So
absolutely. And that is a good segue into a question that's directed towards Rob and Virginia. Are you guys using a fixed number for the inflation that's being that is a percent being added to the project cost estimates?
It's a great question, and I will try and be as brief as I can with an answer, because I know every state DOT is struggling with this in the current market conditions. We're no different in Virginia. We do reach out to some economists and try and get a handle on what the real inflation is in our state by different regions and how it impacts our construction going forward, not just in the current fiscal year, but also looking out a little further into the out years. I feel pretty strongly as director of PMO that the designer still should maintain some authority over that for engineering judgment. And by that, I mean that if you're designing a bridge, steel may inflate at different rates than the concrete. And I think there needs to be some common sense applied, but we certainly do provide guidance as far as acceptable ranges, which our project managers can use for their estimates, as I suspect most DOTs do.
All right, thank you. We have time for just a couple more questions. I do appreciate everybody sending those in. That makes it easier on me from having to ask the questions. So, and these guys too. They're better questions than what I could think of. Sarah, after the southern part was added, did the VE propose recommendations to let the project as multiple smaller scale projects to allow for competitive bidding among smaller roadway constructors? So
they did not. That wasn't one of the 6 that they presented us with. Could it have been one of the 116 that they originally evaluated? Maybe. I don't remember seeing it though. We did talk about that a little bit. We actually thought we'd get an economy of scale by putting them together originally. And that's why we packaged together in the first place, since they butt up to each other. So that was not one of them for this location. It has been brought up in other locations since, though.
All right, thank you. Here's a statement from New Jersey DOT that they have a change control board to track the changes, and they do require approval from senior leadership for major changes. funds in excess of over 500,000. So that also is another good way to monitor change and control changes on projects. So Rob, there's a request to explain the RACI matrix and maybe around specifically the stakeholder aspect of that.
Sure. So RACI is responsible, accountable, consult, and inform, if I'm remembering that correctly. And what that means is not everybody needs the same level of information. So for stakeholders and for your team members, for that matter, it's often can be beneficial to put together a RACI matrix. And this just isn't unique to transportation. It's true for project management across industry boundaries, where you define who needs to know what information when, basically. So some stakeholders, they're not all created equal, specifically talking about stakeholders. Some people just want to be informed. So if it's a neighborhood business where you're taking property from them and you're in active negotiations, you know, it's certainly more than just informing. You need, they would fall into different columns there. So it's just a way to think about stakeholders kind of proactively. And if you do that, it enables you, I believe, to more effectively communicate with them when problems arise.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. We are close on time. Sarah, there was a question. I think this is when we can streamline is, were you managing other projects at the same time as you're managing?
Yes.
This one, which is a doozy. Okay.
Yep. I also had $121 million design build going on at the same time. So we're started construction about the time that this one started in major design aspects, but I'm also doing another project on 131 just east of here that's about $80 million job, mostly rehabilitation. So yep, this isn't my only project. So which made it interesting. It was nice to be able to take a break from this and bounce over to another one when we had to table something to make a decision on. It gave me a breather a little bit.
All right, very good. Well, keep up the good work. And one shout out for Virginia DOT. Rob, it sounds like you guys are hiring. So in Richmond, somebody's Ray Soto is putting out a feeler for anyone that's a good fit. So shameless plug there, but okay. I mean, that's Rob, you're here. So you know, we thank you for being here. So we're gonna let that one go. So that is all we have. We did address all the questions that I'm aware of. And so, we have a Go Blue comment in there. Okay.
That's okay. I'll let it
sorry.
go. It's okay. It's
right.
Michigan State weekend. So
Oh,
I was expecting, there's a reason I wore it today.
Okay. Well, I might, just disclaimer, my parents are both Wolverines, so we may have to get a bet going. Okay.
That's all right. Yeah.
All right.
We'll talk after then.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate everyone's engagement. This is a lot of fun to do. It's a lot of work. So we do appreciate that Rob and Sarah put a lot of work and effort into their presentations. We appreciate them being here, and we want to welcome anyone that's wanting to come back to our next webinar. I don't know that we have a date, but we may. Trisha, I don't know if you have anything to wrap
January 26th.
All right, January 26th, same time. We look forward to that. And without keeping anybody any longer, if there's nothing else, we will thank you again. And we hope that you stay safe and come back and see us. Thank you.